We'll be getting started. And we're getting started. Good afternoon, and welcome to Sensible Financial Planning's webinar, Managing Money as a Couple, Thinking About Marriage. My name is Bobby Carlton. I'll be your moderator today. This is the first in our series about managing money as a couple. We're starting with a webinar on things to think about before you walk down the aisle. Rick Miller holds a PhD in economics from the University of Chicago and started Sensible Financial over 20 years ago. He's also a certified financial planner. You can see all our past webinars at Sensible Financial's website at sensiblefinancial.com/webinars. You can register for upcoming webinars through a link in the Sensible Financial newsletter, which we'll be publishing later on this month, or at sensiblefinancial.com/webinar. Please submit your questions through the Q&A link at the bottom of your window. Rick will answer as many questions as he has time for. Unfortunately, he can't give personal advice in this setting. There isn't time to gather the information and context necessary to do so. We'll be sharing Rick's contact information at the conclusion of the webinar, and Rick will now begin today's presentation.
Thank you, Bobby, and good afternoon, everyone. As we get started, we have a quick survey that we'd like you to participate in. And you should see it momentarily. We should have the results very soon. Just trying to find out who is here, and that may help us tailor our comments a little bit. Okay. Well, here we are. So we have about a quarter of the group is single, and another quarter is in a long-term relationship, and the balance of people are either married or someone they love is getting married. Thank you very much for participating. Okay, so let's begin. We're starting with a picture of the Disney castle, as you can see, with fireworks in the background. And this is to suggest that the importance of myths and romantic relationship myths in our culture. So when we think, at least when I think of relationship myths, I think of Snow White and Cinderella and the Princess Bride. There's excitement about prominent couples like William and Kate and Harry and Meghan, and now Taylor and Travis. And they were featured just yesterday in, wait for it, the Wall Street Journal, that well-known celebrity gossip tabloid. And the common theme here is that the prince finds a princess or the princess finds a prince, and they're going to get married. But the prince or the princess has a kingdom, big houses, castles, servants, not a worry in the world. Celebrity couples live a luxurious lifestyle. Taylor has a private jet. Travis has a custom Rolls Royce. Money is no issue for these couples. And that's kind of a change in the way we think about marriage, because historically, marriage was always about money and resources, and love is the new phenomenon. But in our day, love is what people think about, and money, if we think about it at all, is a distant second. Now, as we think about marriage and marriages, we have to recognize, unfortunately, that not all marriages work out. Not all marriages succeed. And in fact, the average success rates are distressingly low. Roughly half of US marriages end in divorce after 20 years. That's over here. Here's half. And even if we look at marriages of the more educated, and we see on this side that people who have a bachelor's degree have lower divorce rates than people who don't, still 20% of marriages in that group end after 20 years. That's a lot. And why is that? it turns out that money plays a big role. Now, I'm not an expert in divorce, and I couldn't find that much statistical academic work on why US couples divorce. But the work that I could find indicated that money and finances are very important. They're sources of disagreements in marriage, and those disagreements, if they're severe, often lead to divorce. And I found one study that was pretty quantitative, and it produced a list of disagreement areas, and the rank order of areas of disagreement in terms of frequency for wives and husbands are about the same. In this study, put finances first. Now, as a financial advisor, the only disagreements on this list that I hear about are these disagreements, and they're the only ones that I have something to say about. But I think that we have some helpful ideas that could help you and your prospective spouse, or this prospective spouse that you're thinking about, deal with this issue or set of issues. Now, unlike in fairy tales, love alone does not a strong marriage make. Love and money both matter. Life will test both your personal relationship and your ability to work together on your finances. Successful marriages rely on a strong personal relationship, why you're together in the first place, shared values, why you stay together, and an effective money relationship, which provides practical support. When you marry, you make a lot of agreements, and you may not think about it that way. You may have thought that it was just about living together and having it be okay in everybody's eyes that you're living together, but that's just the beginning. I have a lawyer colleague who says that marriage may be the most important legal agreement you make in your life. Now, some of the aspects of this agreement have nothing to do with money. They have to do with family arrangements and personal arrangements, but some are very financial. They deal with assets and taxes and presumption of inheritance. So money is baked into marriage from the beginning. Now, there are 50 different states, 50 different sets of laws. So if you move from the state where you get married to a new state, it may be worthwhile finding out if there are important differences in the laws. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to say anything else about the laws, but it is absolutely the case that when you get married, you participate, or you start a large number of formal agreements that you may not necessarily be aware of, because they're not in a document that you sign. It's not a mortgage where everything is listed. Now, the world is likely to challenge your new family's money life. And I've got a graph here that shows the unemployment rate over time. That's in blue. All of this here with the peak here. And also recessions, and the recessions are in gray. Now, what does that have to do with marriage? Your marriage will operate in the larger economy. And recessions are times when the economy slows down. Raises are smaller, bonuses are smaller, unemployment increases, people lose their jobs. And while one tends to think of the economy as something outside of your life, or something in which your life participates, the broader economy can have a big impact on you personally. As one of our former presidents said, Harry Truman, the difference between a recession and a depression is that it's a recession when your neighbor loses their job, and it's a depression when you lose your job, or when your spouse loses his or her job. And so the broader economy can put stress on the financial aspects of your relationship. So where do those, let's be more specific about those sources of stress. Your marriage could be stressed by experiencing times when you're spending more than you earn, borrowing more than you can comfortably repay. You might, in a situation like that, think that your spouse is spending wastefully. You might have investment losses. You might have unequally shared burdens. And as a result, you or your spouse or both could be very unhappy. So, what can you do about that? I'm going to suggest that a strong money foundation can help you and your spouse and your marriage weather financial issues. And how can you prepare for those financial issues? And I think actually it's pretty simple. You can talk about it. What would you do if one of you lost your job? What if your investments did very poorly? What if your outgo exceeded your income? What if you had to take time off from work, one of you, to care for children or for aging parents? All of these things can happen, and all of them can put stress on your relationship with your spouse. So, this section was intended to suggest that your money relationship is foundational for your marriage. Money matters a lot in marriage. Preparation can help your marriage through money problems. And unfortunately, not dealing well with money can ruin it. So, what makes a strong money foundation? My experience suggests that there are several important components, and we're going to talk about each one of them in turn. They are shared goals, trust, transparency, fairness, and a willingness to discuss difficult issues and to make compromises. So, developing your shared goals is important. And what I'm going to suggest that there is a series of questions that you can discuss together that will help you develop your shared goals. So, what's important to you? You may not really know, but discussing it can help you clarify for yourself what is important to you now and what is going to be important to you in your marriage. What are your life goals for your career, for a family? Do you have a bucket list? What about your spouse? What are their life goals? Are your sets of life goals aligned? And if not, can you work together to align them? How will we get to each one of us? How will we get to where each one of us wants to go? And how can we get there together? What help and support will you need from each other? And will turn taking be required? Often, we when we work with couples, we find that one spouse is uh, doing something that the other spouse is sacrificing to allow the first spouse to do. And the idea is that later on or earlier, one or the other, that the tables were turned and the roles were reversed. And then there may be some non-negotiables, something that one spouse requires. And if the other spouse doesn't agree, then that could be a source of a great deal of difficulty. And items that come up here are children, living near family. Maybe one spouse wants a house on a lake. Everybody has their own list. And it's important to know what your spouse or what your fiance has on their list. And discussing all of these things with your fiance can help you clarify for yourself what's important to you and how you might get there. Trust in your spouse is essential to your marriage. And trust has two key elements: caring and competence. And I heard someone give a very good summary of why both caring and competence are important. Uh, he gave the example of his 5-year-old son, who he said he would not trust to do brain surgery on him. He said he knew that his 5-year-old son cared very much about him, But he also knew that his 5-year-old son was not competent to do brain surgery. So you can see that both of those elements are important for trust. And um, uh, in the case of marriage, caring because you care for each other. And in the money realm, caring is taking each other's preferences and interests into account and sharing information and resources. And competence is important in marriage because you rely on each other. And in the money realm, competence is contributing resources and using resources wisely. Transparency is a key contributor to trust because it's a sign of caring. In your marriage, you will share many things, and financial resources is an important component of the things that you will share. And to share well, you have to know how much do you have? How many financial resources do you have? How much will you have? When will you have it? And you have to decide what you'll use it for, how you'll share decision making, and how you'll share the resources. Life can be busy and complicated, and it takes work to keep track of your resources and how you're using them. And it takes work to agree on what you're doing with your money. Agreeing on transparency from the start makes it easier to be transparent as you go forward. And people can accidentally not be transparent, not on purpose, but just because they're too busy. And if, as we'll talk about later, if one spouse has responsibility for an area, they may be too busy. They may not have time, or it may seem that they don't have time to share all of the information about the area that they're responsible for. And it is true that if one spouse is responsible for one area, that asking them to share too much can be an overload for the other spouse. But on the other hand, not enough sharing can mean poor decisions because they're underinformed, or because both spouses don't participate. And also, the spouse that's not in charge of that area can be surprised. And surprise is not a great thing in the area, usually or often in the area of finances. Now, the second aspect of transparency, or something to be avoided, is secrets. Financial secrets are potentially very dangerous for a marriage. Keeping money secrets is a breach of trust, and it suggests a lack of caring. And I'm going to share one example of a situation that I'm aware of where a money secret actually ended up destroying a marriage. This was a marriage, a second marriage for one of the spouses, and they had a child from a previous marriage, and they were providing financial support to that child. And the two spouses discussed it, and the spouse with the child from the first marriage agreed that they would no longer provide that support. And then they broke that agreement. And the first spouse, the spouse who had thought that no further support was going out of their shared resources, was furious to the point where they ended the marriage. And it was both that resources were leaving the marriage that weren't agreed to, and also that it was done in secret. Both of those elements were very damaging. Fairness is another way of demonstrating caring. Unfairness imposes stress on a marriage because the spouse that feels that they're not being treated fairly can grow very resentful. Marriage is a joint economic enterprise. I say it's like a little company, and if you're not sharing both the fruits as well as the costs, then people can be very unhappy. And paying attention to that and making sure that both spouses feel fairly dealt with is in a sense an essential part of your money relationship. And finally, a willingness to discuss and compromise. And I have a news bulletin here for you. You and your future spouse will not always agree. I know that that is a shock, but it is also true. Uh, Disagreements now provide an opportunity to develop your negotiating skills and also to observe how you and your prospective spouse manage disagreements. And it's very important to be able to manage disagreements in the area of money as well as in other areas of your life, because if you can't manage the disagreements, ultimately it makes it much less likely that the marriage will survive, and certainly it will make it less likely that the marriage will do well and will be a great experience for both spouses. You're going to have a lot of opportunities to discuss and negotiate after you're married. How much house to buy, how many children to have, managing career opportunities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Disagreements can build over time, and papering over disagreements for the sake of the marriage can end up being counterproductive, because disagreements that are papered over can end up coming back to be unresolvable. Okay. Bobby, I think we're ready to take questions at this point. We have more to come in the webinar, but we can take questions if we have any. If we don't, we can just move forward.
We do already have one question in here, but I will also offer to anybody who is listening, if you are interested in asking a question, you can drop that into the Q&A function. So, Rick, this first question is pretty specific. This question is about joint capital assets, so investment accounts for a much older spouse and a younger spouse couple. Should the older spouse hold all the accounts individually so the younger spouse benefits from the step-up provision? Or should the much older spouse add themselves to the younger spouse's accounts so the younger spouse can at least benefit from 50% of the step-up provision?
Well, this is as you say, Bobby, is a very specific question. And the answer is it depends, and it depends on a lot of factors. I think that if your sole objective is getting the step up in basis, then as the questioner suggests, then there can be benefit from doing that. However, there are many other factors that play a role here. And in particular, I think the relationship and the nature of the relationship is important. And both spouses have to be comfortable with the notion of, let's say, having the older spouse holding all the accounts individually. The younger spouse may feel disempowered by that. That may not be a good thing. And having the older spouse adding themselves to the younger spouse's accounts, again, the younger spouse may not think that's such a great idea. So it's not just a money question. And I would add that in general, money questions are never just money questions. They're never just about money. They're about other ideas that are important, other feelings that are important, and sometimes money stands for other feelings. And I will give a very brief example of that. There was a couple in their early 50s, and the husband wanted an expensive red sports car. And the wife was very, very unhappy about that. The wife was sure that it was an expression of the husband's dissatisfaction with her, and that he was looking for a newer model, not just in the sports car. And the husband thought about that the sports car as something that he had never been able to have, something he'd never been able to afford, and it was an indication of his achieving a certain level of success in his life. And he had no interest whatsoever in a newer model. But the couple argued about this car for a long time because neither of them could express what the car and its redness represented. I see we have a second question.
Yes, we do have a second question and also a thank you for the answer on the first one.
Okay.
The
So
second,
any general advice for couples with a significant 20-year age difference looking for actionable things to do or take advantage of? Couples with large age differences are complicated have complicated financial issues for us as financial advisors. The several things come to mind. The first is that couples with the age differences of this size will be at different stages in their lives um, for some period of time. If everything works out and people both members of the couple live a long time, then the couple that was 30 and 50 will be 40 and 60 and 50 and 70 and 60 and 80. And so thinking about, let's say, older adult living arrangements is less straightforward than it is when the couples are the same age. If you're thinking about guaranteed or predictable income, if you're thinking about annuitizing, a joint and survivor annuity, the payout is going to be lower than it would be if the couples were closer to the same age. And then finally, and I shouldn't say finally, but another issue that comes to mind, because there are many and we don't have time to look at them all, if the older member of the couple was the primary breadwinner, let's say, then there are more years of retirement to be covered by the financial resources that the couple shares. And that means that just thinking about how to fund that income could place more stress on the resources of the couple. So thinking through how they're going to manage that is a bit more challenging.
and we do have some other questions coming in as well, some questions that were provided to us before the presentation. Our next question is, how would you advise a couple to reach an agreement when one spouse has a high tolerance to risk in investments and the other one is more conservative? And that actually mirrors one of the questions that we got in advance of the webinar today, which is handling different risk tolerances when it comes to investments.
This is very challenging. I would add that it can be helpful to think about risk capacity as well as risk tolerance. Risk capacity is the amount of risk that the couple can afford, and risk tolerance is the amount of risk that the couple can stand. And one thing that I would say is that if your financial plan is if your spending is within your means, so if you can afford to live the way you're living with the resources that you have without taking investment risk, then there is no need whatsoever to take investment risk. And then we can work with couples to identify, let's say for the member of the couple with a low tolerance for risk, we can work with them to say that there is a certain sum that the member of the couple with the high tolerance for risk could invest at risk without placing the couple's entire financial future at risk. So it's a little bit like if you go to Las Vegas and you say, well, I'm going to go to the casino for fun, and I know that I could spend $100 on a show, or I could spend $100 gambling, and so I'm going to spend $100 gambling instead of going to the show, but I can afford to lose $100. So if the less risk tolerant spouse can come to an understanding of how much risk that the couple's overall financial picture is really placed at by the other member of the couple taking that financial risk that they would like to take, then I think that's a way to at least begin the discussion that may help them resolve that that area where their preferences are not fully aligned.
Our next question, again from somebody before the webinar, is asking, what is the first step to take when combining finances as a couple? And a related question, how and when should you handle insurance coverage as a couple, before marriage or after?
Oh my. Well, there are two questions there, Bobby. So they're not, that's not one question. That's two questions. So let's take the first one.
All right.
And please
First
repeat.
step when combining finances as a couple.
The first step when combining finances as a couple, we're actually going to talk about in the next section of the webinar. So I'm going to postpone that one. And then I think the second one was
How
about
and when should you handle insurance coverage as a couple, before marriage or after?
That one, insurance coverage is not one thing, right? There's life insurance and disability insurance and car insurance and homeowners insurance and umbrella liability insurance and long-term care insurance. So some of those, so disability insurance is inherently an individual coverage. And so there's not necessarily a lot of combining to do before marriage. Homeowners coverage is related to the dwelling rather than to the nature of the relationship. So if you're both in a home, you should have one homeowner's policy. If you're in two different homes, you should have a policy for each one. If you each have a car, you should be sure that each car is insured. So the one coverage that I can think of that really should be thought of once the marriage is once you're married is life insurance, and there we're thinking about situations where one member of the couple is somewhat dependent, or maybe they both are dependent on each other's income to support their living standard, and then there I would say that what's most important is to have a joint financial plan, because in the joint financial plan, then you can determine how much life insurance each person should have. So that's an example of a coverage where I think that the nature of the relationship or the status of the relationship is the defining consideration. And I think, Bobby, we should move on because I don't want to run out of time here. Okay. All right. So in this section, we're going to talk about building a shared financial plan outline. And I'm not going to, even though I'm a financial planner, and even though I think everyone should have a financial plan, I'm not going to insist and pound the table that you should have a full financial plan before you get married. I think that's way overdone. But I do think that sketching a plan, and I say sketching a plan, helps you start to build your money relationship, to build the foundation for your money relationship, and also helps you to work on sharing, discussion, and compromise. So in that plan outline, I would suggest a starting point that you discover, and we'll talk about what that starting point would be, talking about life goals and with financial implications, talk about sources of meaning to each of you that have financial implications, talk about any explicit financial goals, talk about making a commitment to protecting each other financially, which does relate back to the question that we just talked about with insurance, and a sketch again about how you'll manage money together. Now, I don't want to go all Jane Austen on you, but the Jane Austen novels and movies, and I'll mention a few: Persuasion and Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility, they all focus on much more than other books and movies that I have seen. They focus much more on the financial aspects or the money aspects of a marriage than many other novels and movies do. So if money is going to be an important part of your married life, and I'm suggesting that it will be, it's a good idea to think about the money aspect before you get married. And here's some thought starters for things to think about. Living standard. What will constitute a living standard that each of you is happy with? What kind of a home do you want? Where do you want it to be? What will stand for financial security for each of you, or how will each of you know and feel that you're financially secure? How are you going to make sure that your marriage is financially resilient? If you're going to raise children, what are your thoughts about that? And in what style do you hope to be able to raise your children? And are there extras that are important to you or to your spouse? You should be aware of those if there are. So as you consider those questions, I would suggest that figuring out where you are now is a good place to start. So start at the beginning. What will we do for income? What are we starting with? What assets do we have? What do we owe? And here we have different kinds of assets that you might be thinking about, different debts that you might be dealing with. And it's important to share all of this so that nobody's surprised to you sit down after you got married and somebody says, oh, and by the way, I owe $300,000 in student debt. It would have been good to know that before, because that has implications for all of these other, for the questions that we talked about earlier in terms of what kind of home you want to live in and so forth. And then I would suggest sketching out your first few financial years. So who will be earning? How much will they be earning? Thinking about spending. Where will you live? How much will it cost? When will you finish paying off any debts you have? How and where will you start saving for a house, for retirement? So all of these are things that are worth talking about. And I'm not suggesting, again, that you need to have a formal plan, but it's good to have this all out on the table. Now, you could say, well, that's a lot of work. And it is a lot of work. But I'm going to suggest that it's worth it. I'm not suggesting, again, that you have to have a complete detailed plan, but I am saying that devoting some of your pre-wedding time to thinking about these questions will pay off once you're married. Fewer unpleasant surprises, and also a lot of practice at talking about money, which I think, I submit, will serve you well. And I have some experience with the plans for weddings, and they're often quite involved, and they often take a lot of time. And there, we're just planning a party, and this is your life we're talking about here. It's worth taking some time to plan your life together. Unfortunately, for many people, I'm a math nerd, and so this is not a problem for me, but I recognize that I'm weird. Um, Unfortunately, math is part of thinking about money. You can't spend more than you earn over your lifetime. You have to be able to make decisions about resources that have disparate kinds of measures. So if you're thinking about an asset, that's a one-time purchase or sale, like a house, and somehow you have to put that on the same basis as income, which is a monthly or annual thing. So, and math is required to do that, and some thought is required to do that. So either you need to be able to do that, or you need to have somebody that you can trust help you do it, help you do the math, and help and explain it to you so that you can decide. Because you have to make these financial decisions yourself. No one else can make them for you. So what do you use this math for? Helping you to think about life goals with financial implications. Many of your life goals come with price tags attached, and they're going to be your price tags, but you have to know what they are. Uh, Now, this, when I was thinking about this part of the discussion, I was reminded of a couple that we did a financial plan for a long time ago now, and both of the members of the couple were school teachers, and they planned to have 4 children. And uh, this was early in my financial planning career, and uh, I had just done a few financial plans for uh, families that were uh, pretty affluent, and they had big houses, and they were planning to pay for expensive colleges for their kids. And so we did the first draft of the plan for these 2 school teachers, and we said, you're not going to be able to afford 4 kids. And they said, you don't understand. We know we will. And they proceeded to describe to me where they were going to live, and they were going to live near family. And they had, picked out the place they were going to live, and they knew that they had pensions because they were teachers and they were going to get good teachers' pensions. And they knew that um, uh, their kids didn't have to attend expensive private colleges to get an excellent education. That was true then, and it's true now. Um, and they had really thought carefully about their uh, their life goals and how they were going to accomplish it. And I had to admit that they really had thought it through very carefully and very well. So it's important to develop a sense for yourself of what the price tags are for the things that are very important to you, things that are important, and having an understanding of what those price tags are will help you accomplish what you want to accomplish and also help you manage your expectations. If uh, somebody said to you, if your um, uh, prospective spouse, if your fiance said, well, I really would like to have a private island in the Hawaiian chain, then you know that they need a lot of resources. Hawaiian islands are really expensive, like really expensive. I don't know what the numbers are, but I'm expecting it's, if you don't have a billion, it's probably pretty tough. So, and that's kind of a silly example, but um, uh, it's important to have a sense of realism as well as aspirations. You and your fiance may have different ideas about many things, and it's essential to talk about what's important to you. And the examples on the page are just thought starters. Ask each other questions. Is travel more important to you, or a big house? Do you like to give or expect big presents at the holidays? Um, what about yours and mine versus ours? Is it your car and my car, or are they our cars? Is it your hobby and my hobby, or our hobbies? How's that going to work? If if my hobbies are expensive and you make all the money, how are we going to make that work? So and is charitable giving important to you, and how much? All of these things are good to explore before you're married rather than finding out after you're married, especially if there are things that you might not have expected. And then don't wait until you've been married for 10 years to mention that uh, you want a really big house, or it's essential for you to live like Beyonce, or you have a very large savings target. Again, that has a big impact on the financial aspects of your relationship. Now we get to insurance here a little bit, and making a commitment to protecting each other financially is an important part of caring for each other. Um, and in particular, uh, carrying enough life insurance, making sure that you have enough disability insurance to protect both you and your spouse if something should make it impossible for you to keep working. That's very important, and something to think about. I'm maybe reconsidering my uh, answer to the question about insurance before or earlier on in the discussion. I think it's important to understand that insurance is an important aspect of financial protection. And then thinking about earning power. Um, what if one spouse, one partner takes time off to help take care of parents or children? Their earning power could be dramatically reduced, and a decision that has big financial implications, and it's something that should be discussed fully. If that's something that you're thinking about before you're married, it's good to talk that through, because the spouse that takes time off is going to not be able to earn as much. And how are you going to deal with that as a couple? How will we organize our money? What will we share and what will we keep separate? And I've suggested a mechanism for doing this. I've got sticky notes here and categories, and thinking about this at least a little bit before you get married is helpful. So how will we organize? And let's think about um, what will happen, or not what will happen, but how we're going to deal with the property that we might own. Is my house going to become our house? Is your condo still going to be your condo, or is it going to be ours? Are we going to contribute equally to house expenses? Or is one of us going to be responsible for one part and somebody else going to be responsible for another part? Is one of us, are we going to each cook for ourselves? Is one of us going to cook for the other? How are we going to do that? Are your earnings going to be just for you? Are my earnings going to be for both of us? These are important questions, and they're worth talking about. Now, you will have to, like it or no, manage your money, and both of you will have money things to manage. And I've listed here a number of duties. These are things that have to be done. Uh, you will have a budget, even if you haven't written it down. You will have a budget of what you typically spend. Um, you have to pay your bills. If no one pays the bills, someday the lights will go out. That will not be good. Um, Having some idea of your income and your spending is essential. You can't spend more than you earn over your lifetime. And uh, if you spend too much early on, you'll find later in life that you can't spend as much as you'd like to be able to. Um, your taxes have to be paid. The IRS is notoriously unsympathetic. Uh, I'm reminded of the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, which I enjoyed very much, although it was um, there were a lot of quick cuts. I guess, or I found it a little difficult to follow the first time. But the IRS plays a major role, and a very unsympathetic role. Um, and then finally, deciding affirmatively about your investments. saving by itself is not enough. And we sometimes see people who come to us, let's say with 401ks or 403bs, and they have investments and they don't know, they can't tell us why they chose those particular investments. And it's a good idea to have good reasons for your investment decisions and shared reasons. And it's a good idea for both of you to know how each other's accounts are invested and your shared accounts are invested. So we have the things that have to be done, and then the question is, well, who's going to do it? How are we going to get it done? Are we going to take turns? Are we going to divide and conquer? Or is one person going to be charged with doing it all? And however we do it, then we have to decide how we're going to share information about what we're doing. I will observe that it's very frequently couples will come to us and one spouse is focused on one area of spending and another spouse is focused on another area of spending, and nobody has an idea of what the big picture looks like. And it's very enlightening for them when we put it all together and show them what it all looks like. But it's better if both of you know what the big picture is. Sometimes people specialize and one person takes care of all the money and the other person takes care of other things, and that can be very efficient, but it can also be risky and it can pose difficulties because, and I will say, you just take care of it. I don't even need to know what you're doing because I trust you is not a great idea, because the financial decisions that you take as a couple or that one person takes for you as a couple influences what the other person is going to be able to do and how the other person is going to be able to live from a money perspective or a financial perspective. So having both people have input and having both people see what the results are makes for results that both people are happier with and makes for less surprise and there's less potential for disagreement because something went on the wrong way, if you will, for years before the other person found out. So, for example, if you save too much, then you've got missed opportunities to enjoy life. If you save too little, then you've got retirement with tight resources for one or for the other or for both. If the investments aren't managed the way that both are comfortable with, then you might have too much risk. Bad markets might devastate your financial situation and surprise you. And finally, I will tell you that we sometimes see widows or widowers who really don't know their financial situation because their spouse who just passed away was managing a lot of it and wasn't asked to share, and then the widow or widower has to scramble to try to figure out where everything is and what's going on and what they have, and it's not necessary. And if information is better shared, then that doesn't have to happen that way. And that concludes the formal discussion. Bobby, we can take some more questions.
Yes, we have a couple of additional questions. And again, folks, if you have questions, if you can drop them into the Q&A, that would be terrific. Our first question is, we have a couple in their mid-60s, one retire, other will be retiring soon. They are ruminating over whether to buy or rent for the next era of life. Cash to buy is in CDs or could be invested if they become perpetual renters. They're in a high cost of living West Coast real estate market. What kind of questions might deepen their discussion of this planning process?
Well, I can refer them to a webinar that we did on this whole subject. In fact, we did a whole series of 4 webinars on housing and retirement. And I would suggest that as a very good resource. We thought about that a lot, and we talked about it in considerable detail. So I would suggest that.
Absolutely. And while you're answering the next question, we will go off and get that link for folks that are interested. Our next question: what are some of the factors involved in married couples' decision-making process regarding income tax filing status? So the married filing jointly, married filing separately, etc.
I have learned in working with a tax accountant that we refer clients to that intuition is a very poor guide to making decisions about taxes. And rather than think about what those factors are, I would suggest simply consulting a CPA or somebody who prepares taxes and does tax strategy. Because if you have any complexity in your situation whatsoever, it's not something that you want to do on your own. On the other hand, if your situation is pretty straightforward, a piece of software like TurboTax will allow you to run your taxes both ways so that you can see which one is more tax efficient. So that's the answer I would make. I'm sorry, I don't have, if this, then file jointly, if that, file separately. But it really does depend a great deal on the details.
Excellent. And our next question isn't really a question so much as it's someone asking about attending the next chapter of Life Rent versus Buy webinar, but that's actually pre-recorded. So we will be able to provide you with that link. I was just looking things up on the website because the older living adult webinars are all in a group. So we do have access to those, and we can actually send those out with the recording afterwards.
Okay.
So, Rick, any last words of advice?
Surely. Just one. Let's move on, and we can look at the summary here. Okay. So money will play a central role in your marriage. Managing your money well will help make your marriage happier. Starting to talk about money early on makes it more likely that your marriage will be successful, and it may help you avoid serious mistakes. Having enough is important, but agreeing about what is enough and agreeing enough about how to manage is essential. And I wish the couples who are about to embark upon marriage the very best. And thank you everyone for coming. We'll see you next time.